Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Center for Student Involvement in Careers, CSIC, and UBC's Vancouver Point Grey campus are situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Today, you may be joining us from many places with many different histories, and you can learn more on the traditional owners of those lands at www.native-land.ca. Again, that will be in the chat there. Also, you should be able to see a QR code and link on your screen and in the chat. And we really like you to take a moment to either follow the link and scan the QR code to check in and let us know you're attending the event. That's very useful for our team, and we really appreciate that. Okay. So my name is Rob Kim. I'm a career strategist with the CSIC, and I'll be your moderator today. Whilst we're in our event space, I'd like to remind everyone that all members of the UBC community are expected to uphold a respectful environment in which respect, civility, diversity, opportunity, and inclusion are valued. For those of you who may not know, the Center for Student Involvement is home to UBC's Central Career Office, and it's a resource for all of you UBC students and alumni. At the CSIC, you'll find our Work Learn program, our career development coaches, virtual workshops, and online resources. Lots of great resources for you, as well as the employer and alumni team who create opportunities to engage with employers and professionals through career fairs, employer information sessions, and our careers online job board. So make sure you check that out. You can visit us at Brock Hall. We're right across from Enrollment Services, or through your account on Careers Online to learn more about our services. All participants are muted for the duration of the event, but feel free to turn on your camera. It's always nice to see your faces as we go through the event. We will have a Q&A opportunity in the second half of today's office hours, so make sure you start noting some questions down as we go through. And some of you have already sent in some of your questions, and I'll make sure we can get to those throughout our Q&A. You're welcome to either send in your questions through Zoom, chat once our Q&A starts, or you can use your mic camera to ask a question. There's also the raise your hand function, which will work too, and we'll do our best to provide you an opportunity to speak with Spencer. Please keep your questions short and concise, as it will provide us with an opportunity to answer more of them. Now, I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Spencer Kent. Spencer Kent is a UBC Sauder School of Business alumni, class of 2010. He's currently the executive in charge of the Vancouver studio of Industrial Light and Magic, otherwise known as ILM. He started his post-secondary education at Capilano University's Motion Picture and Video Production one-year program with the hopes of breaking into the film industry afterward. That didn't happen. Without a very clear direction, Spencer enrolled in UBC a few years later, which led to graduating with his BCom from the Sauder School of Business. He completed his coursework in 3.5 years, so he could start his career as soon as possible. His first job out of school was at PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, and tax. Getting there was a challenge for Spencer. The networking recruiting sessions put him way out of his comfort zone. He managed to get interviews at all Big Four accounting firms after his first round of networking, which resulted in no job offers. It wasn't until his second attempt he landed the PwC job. 3 years later, and a couple new letters after his name later, Spencer decided to seek out an industry job. He actually set his sights back on film and landed a finance role in visual effects without really understanding what visual effects was at that time. Spencer spent the last 9 years working at Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, which of course was founded by George Lucas, and is the lead visual effects facility in the world. In his time there, Spencer has worked in various areas of finance with local and global responsibilities as the Vancouver studio went through an accelerated period of growth. In March of 2020, the position of executive in charge of the Vancouver studio became vacant. Spencer decided not to apply, at least not at first. As an introvert, networking isn't something that has ever come naturally to Spencer, but is an important part of his journey. As a person who also valued certainty, making pivots, and taking nonlinear paths in his career, has also pushed Spencer out of his comfort zone regularly. I'm really excited for all of us to hear a bit of Spencer's story, and I'm going to give the floor now to Spencer. Thank you for all of you for being here.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. I'll just say, as an introvert, hearing you talk about me, that was interesting. But thank you. I appreciate the intro, and it's almost like trauma, actually. But let me open my deck, and I'll get going. You already covered all the good bits, but let me see here. Hopefully, you can all see my screen. Got some nods. Great. So hey everybody, my name is Spencer. I'm calling in today from my home, which is on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. And I'm very grateful to be here today, joining you all in these virtual office hours. So thank you so much for having me. So yeah, I'm Spencer. As Rob mentioned, I work for Industrial Light and Magic, ILM. ILM is known for making visual effects. It's the company that George Lucas created to make visual effects for Star Wars specifically. So it is a subsidiary of Lucasfilm, which of course, as many of you may know, a Disney company now. Our studio in Vancouver has been here for 11 years now, and I've been fortunate enough to be part of it for 9 of those years. All right, so let's get going. I'm going to start with a brief overview of my experience. This quote here I really like. It sounds a bit negative, but I think what I've learned along the way for me is you learn a lot from your mistakes. So they aren't always that bad. They give you the experience to learn. As some of you may know, this is an Oscar Wilde quote, and I quite like Oscar Wilde, which is initially what led me to UBC in terms of the Faculty of Arts, not Oscar Wilde specifically, but an interest in English Lit. So these are the kind of the points that Rob mentioned that we'll be covering over today in terms of my experience, starting with CapU, taking a few years off after, ending up at UBC and specifically Sauder School of Business, from PricewaterhouseCoopers to visual effects, and eventually Industrial Light and Magic, where I still am now. So Cap. When I went to Cap University, I'm going to have a lot of these references. Like when I was younger, it was called this. It was called Cap College still. But I was fresh out of high school. I had these big ambitions to be a Hollywood filmmaker. I signed up for this program. I took I went to an info session about it, and I thought it sounded amazing. My parents told me, why don't you try to become an accountant first, then take a film program? But, I decided to do the other way around. It was a great program. It was really interesting. I don't know if any of you have ever taken anything like this, but it was one of those things where, you'd put your projects out and the instructors would critique them, kind of American Idol style, like these really harsh critiques. So it was a really good learning opportunity. And, I kind of joined that program thinking, I'm going to produce, write, direct my own movies. I'll be this big Hollywood person. I had this dream of making these character-driven, family-based dramas, or slasher movies. That was another genre I was really interested in. Maybe I missed out on this untapped network or market for a combination of those two things. But at the end of the day, what I really learned from that program was that my best bet to get into the film industry was to become a production assistant, because I didn't think that I had what it takes to do either of the first 3 things, or at least I didn't want to be a starving artist. I have a lot of respect for anyone who does the PA role. I just want to say that, but I didn't think it was the path for me. So my big lesson from CapU, and it was a pretty expensive lesson, was that I didn't want to be a PA. So what's next? Now what? Instead of making a decision, I just continued down a path that I had already started in high school. In high school, I had started working in retail, and I continued to work retail after Cap. I'd worked at Guess Jeans, then I worked at Best Buy, and I worked at BB. I recognized Guess and BB. I don't know if anyone actually knows those brands anymore, but they were relevant when I used to work there. And from retail, I ended up working in a call center. At the call center, my job was to coach customer service agents on handling usually very angry customers as they were trying to make extended warranty claims. as exciting as that must sound, I realized after a while that I was ready to try something different. And I applied to UBC, specifically to the Faculty of Arts. I just want to say at this point, I still didn't know where this would lead me, but I felt really good about making a step and making a change. I was ready for something different. So I got to UBC, and I was working part-time still. I kind of had this mentality when I got to UBC that I was there to get in and get out. I wanted my degree, and really that kind of, I'm not here to make friends kind of vibe. So that was my focus. I got in and I started in the Faculty of Arts. But as I was doing that, I got my prereqs for commerce, just in case. When I started to think about commerce, I thought that I would actually specialize in HR. I took when I was in the HR course, there was this bargaining simulation between management and union, and it was very quickly after that simulation that I decided HR definitely wasn't for me. And so I thought a bit about accounting. I kind of liked math in high school, or at least, I did well enough in math at high school. And there's something really nice that I thought about in terms of how in accounting everything balances, or it's just supposed to balance. And I don't know if there are any Mean Girls fans out there, but it kind of made me think about how Katie thought math was great because it was the same in every language. What I learned very quickly about accounting, though, especially as an introvert, wasn't at UBC to make friends, is that I realized networking is a big part of accounting and getting a job afterwards. And that made me a little bit uncomfortable, but I thought, maybe I need to push myself out of the comfort zone. So my first foray into that kind of forced, awkward networking was the Big Four accounting recruitment sessions. And I'm just going to be real. I thought they were really tough, and I did not like them. Having said that, I did it, and I managed to get an interview with all the Big Four accounting firms for a summer internship my first time around. And as was mentioned earlier, that led 4 interviews, 0 jobs. That was pretty crappy. I didn't get a job, and I was like, people knew, even though I wasn't there to make friends, I still knew people, and so everyone knew that I'd gotten 4 interviews, and so having to tell people whenever they asked that I hadn't gotten one, that really sucked. So I took my time, kind of licking my wounds and dusting myself off, and so I started calling the firms, emailing the firms, not to beg for a job, although it crossed my mind, but to try to understand what happened. Like, there was enough in my application to get me to the interview, apparently enough in the networking that I found so painful to get me an interview, but something happened in the interview that I didn't understand where I went wrong. And I'll be honest, I didn't get great answers from them. I think at the end of the day, there aren't a lot, at least there weren't a lot of internship jobs with the Big Four accounting firms when I applied, so you really had to stand out. And so that's what I took away, is that I didn't stand out enough. And so that was kind of my refocus from the rest of my time at UBC. Is like, okay, what can I get on my resume, my CV, to make me stand out a bit more next time? So I looked at some extracurriculars. One was, again, kind of going back to the interest in film. I volunteered for the Vancouver Short Film Festival, doing various roles from sponsorship, which also involved a lot of networking, to kind of treasury and all that good stuff. I joined a business fraternity at UBC called Alpha Kappa Psi. Definitely not something that most people would think of me as a fraternity person. A business fraternity is slightly different, but it's still a fraternity. The beauty of this one was that it was just getting started up at UBC when I kind of got involved. So everybody was new. I wasn't just this one person trying to enter. I did the summer exchange program in Shanghai at the Jiao Tong University. And like I've kind of mentioned tax in the slide, which was a part of my journey too. I did the tax assistance clinic, like anybody who's interested in tax should do. And then I decided, you know what, I need to push this forward. I'm ready to start my job. I want to finish my degree early. And so I started to pile my summers up with courses. I took extra, at the time, correspondence courses. There weren't that many of them. but I started adding to mine, and again, just to try to finish up earlier. So I mentioned tax. My second time around before I went into the recruiting sessions with the Big Four, I targeted tax. I had a tax prof at Sauder who really encouraged me to consider tax. Previously, my experience in tax was when my mom used to make me fill out my tax returns with pen and paper. And so I was like, well, it was good practice, and I figured might as well try. And it was interesting in some aspects to me, for sure. And what that did to me, networking can happen in any shape, way, or form, or with any number of people. And my tax prof introduced me to a bunch of people he knew at PwC in tax, which actually was a huge help ahead of the recruitment sessions. Knowing some of these people, it's so much easier to walk up to somebody you know than to a stranger. So I'm really happy that happened. Excuse me. Okay, sorry, I thought I skipped ahead. My apologies. So this time around, I got 2 interviews, one with PwC Tax and one with TELUS. And I landed PwC. TELUS said no. At that point, PwC had said yes, so I didn't really care. And then I managed to finish my degree in 3.5 years, like I said. So I wrapped up my courses in December, and by that January, I had started PwC in tax, which all kind of just fell into place really neatly. I think when I went through the program, usually you wouldn't start in an audit rotation until September. So I felt very fortunate to start it in January to get going, because I was in a rush. I'm not sure why, but I think if anything, I feel like I'm always in a rush. So I got to PwC, and again, with that theme of rushing through, I joined with that same mentality as I did when I started at UBC. I was there to get my letters. Now, that didn't necessarily mean that I wanted to get in and get out, but I knew that getting my letters, at the time it was a CA, before it became a CPA, I knew that would just open up my options for whatever I did after that. So I went through a number of rotations within the tax group. I tended to gravitate more towards the tech side of things. Some tech and entertainment were combined at PwC at the time. But I also got a bit into cross-border personal tax. So a lot of US and Canadian personal tax returns. And then again, in trying to keep things interesting, both for me, but also just in terms of experience on paper, I went to an assignment in Kolkata, in India. This picture here is actually just down the street from the PwC offices in India, in Kolkata. And I, again, networking, I forced myself to go to these events where partners would try to get us to meet clients. Sometimes I'd go kicking and screaming. In one case, I actually ended up meeting the head of finance at a company called ILM, who just happened to be opening up a shop in Vancouver. I'd love to say that that's what kind of led me to my job, but by the time I interviewed it, he'd totally forgotten about that experience, but it was, something to talk about later on. So eventually with PwC, I passed, I think it's called the CFE now. At the time it was called UFE. I got my letters, and that was that. And so I hadn't decided by that point, I'm out, I need to go find an industry job. It had crossed my mind, but it wasn't a firm decision until I was told that I'd have to go into a rotation that I haven't listed here, but I didn't want to go into it. And so I actively started looking for jobs outside of PwC. Mostly, just to be honest, a lot of it was out of spite because I was frustrated. I'm like, I just got my letters. Don't you want me to stay? Anyway, I ended up leaving, obviously, and I secured my first role in industry for a production accounting role. And then at the time, I had no idea what production accounting is, but production sounded vaguely like film, sounded great. And that was kind of my first foray into visual effects, or VFX. My first year in visual effects was a whirlwind. I worked at a company called MPC, and I barely knew what visual effects was before I joined. I think I vaguely recognized that Jurassic Park probably wasn't real, and that was about it. It's funny. I also had put in my resume at the time that I had advanced Excel skills, which as an accountant, a lot of people just took at face value. I quickly realized I did not have advanced Excel skills at all. So it was a bit of trial by fire in learning how to use Excel. Because the company I worked for, MPC, they didn't have any financial systems for project-based accounting. They just gave me these massive spreadsheets with formulas like that took up my entire screen. And yeah, so it was a steep learning curve, both in terms of learning the tool and understanding what the heck this kind of business was. What I loved about that first year, though, is I had a boss who really challenged me. And I realized, in my career, I thrived on that, and I really wanted to learn more, do better. Within my first year at MPC, I was elevated to run production accounting for the entire company globally. I also will say tax credits are a huge part of visual effects in British Columbia, and that was a big help. My PwC experience was a big help there. So that said, before I took that global production accounting role at MPC, I had started talking to Industrial Light and Magic. And actually the MPC head of production had recently left to go work at ILM in Vancouver. So with barely a year under my belt, I decided to leave and to join the force. So my job at ILM was a little bit less about production accounting and more about finance in general. It was a really, really good learning opportunity for me to kind of branch out further, develop more of my skills. I was one of the very few support staff. So ILM, visual effects is about artistry and technology. So we have lots of artists, lots of production folks, and not always a big support staff. And in the early days of the Vancouver studio, there was barely any. So I was the first finance person on the ground. And because of that, that meant we pitched in a lot of areas that wouldn't typically be in our standard job description. So I developed a closer relationship with the head of the Vancouver studio, who was the person who'd called me up when we had met at MPC. And I essentially became his right hand. And with him, I helped grow the studio significantly, both in headcount and footprint. We began navigating through more complex issues I hadn't encountered before. And I think networking, you always kind of think like it's, when you're in a job, networking is about finding jobs. But I think networking can help people along with their career either way. And I've certainly found that at ILM. So it wasn't exactly the same ways, and I'm not always talking to recruiters or looking for another job, but still building your internal network with it, whether it's industry or, your big parent company like Disney. I got to and continue interacting with our both local provincial government and our federal government. There are also associations set up to kind of advance the film industry, both from a visual effects and animation perspective, but there's a lot of stuff that shoots in Vancouver too. It's all kind of linked. And of course, there's the importance of your internal networks where you work, which of course I continue to build as well. I think the other thing that I've done a lot at ILM, which I'm very appreciative for, and I will say traveling for work isn't something that I necessarily look for, or was never really important to me. I think I like traveling for fun. Traveling for work isn't always the same. But that said, I had great opportunities because of that, because I worked at ILM. So traveling to San Francisco, LA, London, and a bit closer to home, Victoria, Toronto, and Ottawa. And at one point in particular, I went to Ottawa 4 times in 3 months. And that also included a trip to the CRA headquarters, which somebody went through a tax program. I was geeking out a little bit. Nobody else thought it was cool, but I did. So my career was progressing really nicely at ILM, and with ILM, the Vancouver studio was expanding. My role was expanding. It was expanding beyond finance. I started to get my hand into more global ILM issues. And then March 2020, pandemic hits. This is a mural in Gastown, really close to my office. And was actually made by an artist who used to work at ILM named Lucas Lundberg. So at the beginning of the pandemic, the head of our Vancouver studio decided to move back to his hometown of Winnipeg. And by this point, I had worked with him at my last job at MPC and ILM. This is the guy I'd worked with for the longest out of my career. So personally, I was pretty devastated to hear that, because I was losing a really good friend and a colleague. And as Rob mentioned, the role of executive in charge is open, and I felt pretty good about my career path and progression at that point in finance. And I'd also thought, like, well, who goes from finance to running a studio? And I think several ILM executive leaders thought it was possible, but I didn't want to put my hand up. So 6 months go by, we have no head of studio. We have this kind of makeshift committee of people trying to make decisions. And then we started meeting external candidates, and I was on the committee of people who were meeting people who were applying externally for the executive charge position. So I met the first one, and then I realized I can't stand back and watch somebody else do this. And then it made me realize how important ILM was to me and how much it meant to me. So I put my hat in the ring. I guess the rest is history. So I took the executive in charge role just over 2.5 years ago. I included some fun highlights of my time in ILM in general. You know, I want to say these photos, a lot of them are cool. This is not reflective of my day-to-day. I need to say that out loud. It's usually, I'm usually just here. But yeah, so when working at ILM, I've done a lot of really cool things that, I've led us through a pandemic. We opened our first stagecraft virtual production volume. The studio itself has grown from 500 to over 700 people, not just in BC, where we also have folks in Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, and Manitoba. And we've made some really, really significant efforts in diversity and inclusion. The other thing I was just going to say about these photos, not all of them, most of them actually, except for one, were taken before I took this job. I guess that makes sense, because I just told you all I've done most of this job from this desk in this room. So yeah, I think the other thing that's fun is, like, you'll see I did get to go to the Oscars once, and if any of you know about PwC and the Oscars, I felt at one point I'd be more likely to hand out the incorrect ballot than actually get to go. Although it's pretty exciting to actually go. And that's it. I guess to recap, and this is a fun picture of my dog Brutus with some sort of statue. I guess even when I wasn't intentionally networking, the connections I made through the years have all kind of contributed to my path, the journey, and where I am now. I'm in a place which feels nice. I'm content, but also still challenged after kind of years of rushing and trying to get up a ladder. So for me, it hasn't just been about who I've met along the way, but just being open to experiences, putting my hand up, even when I know I could be out of my element and my comfort zone. So I guess networking as an introvert, it's not comfortable. But that's kind of been the recurring theme in my career journey, is that don't stay in the comfort zone, push myself out of it, do things I haven't done before. And honestly, that's how I continue to approach things. So it's certainly so well so far, and it's certainly kept things interesting. I'm rarely bored. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much. That's the part where I think I stopped talking for a little bit.
All right. Thank you so much, Spencer. It's just really great to hear your story. And I hope I'm an introvert too. So I really relate to what you're saying about having to step out of your comfort zone, which is easier said than done. And I think a lot of our UBC students sometimes wonder how that's done as well. So before we move into the Q&A, if you could do me a huge favor, we have a great turnout here. If you could, again, in the chat, you'll see a link for the attendance. That would be very helpful for us. It helps the center and allows us to showcase our work and be able to report that. So we really appreciate that. And now we're actually going to move into a Q&A. We're going to have different ways to do that. I have my chat open, so you can send something through the chat, or you can raise your hand. We'd love to see some of your faces as well. Any questions for Spencer? And then if there aren't any questions, then I'll maybe just like ask Spencer to tell us what's going to happen in like season 3 of Mandalorian or something like that. No. So yeah, let's it's your turn to ask some questions. And again, don't be shy and don't be scared. It does take some courage, I know, to ask these. We recognize that probably a lot of you are introverts too. That's what brought you here. And we just really encourage you to like ask your questions. And sorry if I mispronounced your name. Yeah, you can ask your question. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your time, Spencer, and for navigating us through your story. I have a question, and I'm actually very curious about this. You said that you wanted to rush through university and you did it in 3.5 years. And while doing all of that, you volunteered, joined a fraternity, did sponsorships, did an exchange, did the tax thing. And like, how does that happen? I mean, for some of us, it's like even the errands that you have to run as a student just get too much. So were you taking out time to, I don't know, like working out, taking care of your mental health, or was it just like a straight grind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I definitely know I had some fun when I was going to school. I remember the hangovers, so it definitely it took some time out. I think I I knew when I kind of hit a point where I'm like, this, I'm not going to be able to, like, studying more isn't going to help, or pushing myself further isn't going to help. I have this block at this point. I know it sounded like I did a lot, but I think I also picked things where I was realistic about what that kind of commitment would be. So if it's like the business fraternity side of things, I never was like, I'm going to be the president. I'll be like, oh, I'll do this thing over here that sounds important, but probably won't take as much time as the person who's organizing all the stuff at the same time. Similar with the film festival, the sponsorship thing actually took way more time than I thought. But I think I was just careful about what I signed up for in terms of the extracurriculars, and gave time to myself too. So that was kind of my focus in terms of the extra schoolwork, to rush through. My electives were all, because I did Sauder, my electives, I picked electives that I really wanted, like, so English lit, that was for me, like, I loved English lit. So it felt less like work and just something that I actually wanted to be in and wanted to be reading, and thinking about. Not that I didn't want to be thinking about accounting or tax, but I think in terms of accelerating the career to get things done, the picking electives that I really enjoyed was a huge help in that too.
Great. Thank you for that question. It's a similar question actually in the chat from Ziggy and Kathy. Thank you so much for putting in there. They're both kind of curious, like, what's an advantage in terms of being an introvert, or even think about advantage to networking as an introvert?
Advantage. That's a good one. I think the advantage could be for yourself is, again, flexing muscles or developing skills that don't come naturally to you. That's definitely something that I think is important. It's funny, I work with a lot of leaders at ILM. I'm probably one of the few introverts. And so I think, I often think it's like, I'm sure I did make this up, but we're introverts living in an extrovert's world. I think there's some things that extroverts can learn too, in terms of developing their skills. So I think introverts networking, that means like pushing yourself out of the comfort zone to talk to people, meet people. That isn't easy. A lot of the extroverts I see could benefit from being more quiet and listening once in a while, which is also something that doesn't come naturally to everybody. So in both cases, I'd say the advantage is, not letting extroverts take everything.
I like that. You're right, though, right? Like, listening is a really good skill, active listening and being curious. And that's what a lot of introverts do well. I'm going to kind of flip back and forth from the chat to like real life people, I guess. So Alec has his hand up. So Alec, go ahead and ask your question to Spencer.
Hello. I just wanted to thank you for the story. I've related a lot to that real fear of getting out of your comfort zone. I was wondering, like, when you talked about when there was the empty position at ILM, like you were scared to put your hands up. Was that like sort of some sort of imposter syndrome? Because I know I go through that a lot when I get into these sorts of jobs. Is there any kind of technique to really push you over the edge, or do you just have to barge through the door and work it out after?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I even would have thought about it being something that I was scared of. Uh, I think imposter syndrome is real. If I didn't feel it before applying for the job, I feel it quite often in the job, and that's just me. But I think like I said, the big catalyst was kind of thinking, I'd worked with that same dude who I'd mentioned for so long, and thinking about somebody else in that role. That's what pushed me. So that was one piece of it. But did it force me to? It still pushed me out of my comfort zone, because I actually had to go to the head of the company and be like, hey, I think you should think about me for this role. And I think that was that easy? No, because there's always that fear of rejection, but you never know till you try. So I don't regret waiting that long. If anything, I felt more confident by that point to say, you know what, there's one person who I think can do this, and I think I'll do it well. And that worked out. But yeah, I think part of it is just barging in sometimes and knowing that that's uncomfortable. I do think there'll be moments where you're invited in, and those are great too. So it's not always going to be, elbowing your way into things. At least it hasn't been for me. I've been really fortunate to have been pulled in before too. So just knowing when to barge, I guess.
Thanks for that question, Alec. That was a really nice one. I recognize that this question might be pretty large, so maybe it's like giving us an overview a little bit. Is from Annika here is, what does your day-to-day work involve as an executive in charge?
Firefighting is probably what I do most. It is a lot of firefighting. There are issues that come up all the time. I mean, in visual effects, we're running maybe 15 projects at one time right now. So 15 different project teams, a bunch of artists working on different projects. They all have deadlines. Visual effects is complex, so there's always things to solve for. I think that's firefighting is always, I couldn't give a percentage because every day changes, but it's a huge part of it, just solving problems as they come up, or talking through problems, coaching people through how they would solve their problems, or whatever they need. But in the best of times, it's more strategic thinking. So me thinking like, what can we do to better promote diversity and inclusion internally? How can we, I think people talk a lot about diversity and inclusion these days, which is great, but I'm really interested in like, okay, how can we see action? How can we actually see change? So I think those strategic initiatives are also really interesting. And at the best of times, more time is spent doing that. But day to day is never quite the same. The one constant seems to be Zoom calls. We're slowly moving towards more in-person stuff too, which I as an introvert, I recognize is a bit awkward, but I do actually think it's much better. Actually, I like the mix, so hybrid's great. But yeah, I think that's the other thing we're talking a lot about is like, well, what does the future of hybrid work look like? It's not going to be the same for everybody or every industry. So we're trying to figure out what it means for us. There are a lot of introverted visual effects artists. So I'm trying to be respectful of that and mindful of it too.
Yeah.
That's a snippet of some of the stuff that I've at least thought about today, maybe.
Right. Thank you. So Young, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a specific question. As an introvert, when you're networking, and I hear this all the time, it's like, oh, if you meet someone that's in the field that you want to work in, ask them out for a coffee, like get in touch with them. I find that part really hard. I find like meeting them not hard. Hi, I'm interested, but actually kind of breaking that boundary and like doing a one-on-one, or kind of like, oh, where can you, like, I'm very interested in what you're doing. Like, where can you bring, like, what opportunities do you have available for me? you have any advice for reaching out for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good one. That is awkward. I don't know if I have a good one. I don't think I ever mastered. I never. I mean, I guess I think I picked a good kind of jumping off point for me. Maybe when I met people for coffee most was when I didn't get a job, kind of my first round of recruitment, and I was like, somebody explain to me what I did wrong. But I actually thinking, and I did recruitment on the PwC side. I found the email follow-up on both sides was easier in terms of initiating that. So do people still hand out business cards? I don't know, but if they do, if you exchange email address, you exchange contact info, the kind of easier entry point I find is email, but I find people like to talk about themselves. And so if you ask the right person to coffee, if you feel like they like talking about themselves, and you say something like, hey, I'd love to hear more about this part of your story, a lot of people, especially extroverts, will totally take you up on that. So I think, yeah, totally awkward, but it could also be a key way, I think, and I'm thinking about these big recruitment sessions. It's also a nice exit point too. Like, hey, I'm going to go talk to this person over here. You're up for it. I'd love to meet for coffee at some point. I was more interested in talking to you a bit about this, right? And it proves A, that you're interested or listening and interested, and B, that you're showing initiative. I think it's, especially in those situations, it always kind of feels a bit awkward. And that's just real.
It's a great question, and Spencer's right. A lot of it is just practice, right? Like, introverts, we haven't done it a lot, and I just always reframe it like you're trying to advocate for yourself, and that's okay. And you'll find people who don't want to talk to you, but you'll find people who do. So really encourage you, right, to do that and reach out. As you heard for Spencer, how he did that multiple times, right? We have a question here. Great presentation, Spencer. It's from Samarth. Thanks a lot for sharing your story. What are some avenues for entrepreneurial inclined folks in your industry, especially for those early in their career?
That's a great question. I'm not super entrepreneurial, I feel like, because I've worked at pretty established companies, because that's kind of I wouldn't say comfort, but I'm not that in terms of risk taking. That wasn't necessarily something I felt confident in, and starting my own thing. But I think for me, it's like I think you need to have a good understanding of what you're getting into, and that doesn't mean you have to be the expert of all things in it, but you should probably partner with people who do. What I've seen, there's actually quite a few visual effects companies, 2 or 3 that I can think of, that started in Vancouver, that spun off of really talented, smart visual effects artists who used to work at ILM, and other companies, and they knew going into this that they didn't know everything. So they built their kind of their network of people who did, and got people to buy into this new business, and started up on their own. A lot of them are successful. A lot of them, the one company I'm thinking in particular, it's called Distillery, has done Star Wars work, right? So it paid off for them. So I think you gotta, for me, I think, again, it's not something I've done, but knowing what you're getting into, for one, in terms of the risk and rewards, but also knowing what you're trying to push forward. If it's the case of visual effects, do you know everything there is to know about visual effects? And if you don't, you need to get the people around you who do.
All right, we still have lots of questions here, so let's go with Jade's here. Hello, Spencer. Thanks for the awesome story of some of your years of your career. Jade's asking, have you read any books offering kind of recipes or formulas of maintaining casual friendships with others? If you have any recommendations, that's great. If not, it's understandable.
And now I think maybe I should, because no, I can't think of anything where I've talked. Yeah, no, it would probably benefit me though to read something like that. I've read I don't know, I've read some kind of management theory books, and Actually, not a huge fan of those either. Yeah, no, I haven't, unfortunately. So if you have any recommendations, please let me know.
Yeah. Amon's asking, I'm curious, what were your thoughts behind your switch from tax to the other fields, right? Because, I think of people in Sauder, right? Like people progress within Big Four, they want to become a partner. So like, again, what were your thoughts behind that switch?
Yeah, again, part of it was that childish, I don't want to do that rotation, so I'm going to leave. And PwC called my bluff and I left, which I don't regret. But, I thought about it. I did actually think about, is the partner track something for me? Tax is complex and hard. And there are lots of pieces of it I really found interesting, and pieces like that I didn't like anything, to be honest. But I think I thought about, okay, what, I was a senior associate when I left, and I hadn't settled on what rotation I thought would be my last one. And not that that meant that I couldn't become a partner or anything, but just thinking through the track, I think I just realized, I'm like, I don't know if this is doing taxes in my cards for the rest of the rest of my career. I'm obviously nothing against tax. I'm super grateful for that experience, and I think I've learned a lot. I still talk about tax credits a lot, which is just a small piece of what I learned from PwC. But I think for me, it was just like I kind of, somebody at UBC asked me, like, why would you become an accountant? It was super negative like that. And
Who is that?
Some art student. I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, but he was doing a BA.
Yeah.
But so it was a fair question, and
Yeah.
I you know what, I think I'm not thinking at this point I'm going to be a tax partner. I'm thinking I couldn't find my way creatively into this sector. What other ways can I get in? Is there a business side that'll allow me in? And it wasn't like I had this clear plan. It was just I randomly found a production accounting position on a recruiter's website, and I was like, I think this is in film.
Yeah.
And visual effects is kind of film. It's part of the film industry, but it's definitely its own subsector, totally kind of digital, and there is on-set work, but not as much. So it's a part of it. It's just very different, and definitely not something I thought I'd end up in when I, started CAP, at least.
Yeah. All right, Spencer, another question here. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it. It's kind of specific. It's like we had an information session today, and they raised a question about working with ILM on a working visa. Kim had stated how it's hard to get an internship on a working visa. We know for the tax credits, but they're just wondering, are regular jobs available to people on working visas? And if so, what path should they take to apply for an entry-level role?
Good question. I am not an immigration expert, unfortunately. I think that depends on the terms of the visa and what it states. So, we do hire a lot of artists from outside of the country. There's lots of talented people in visual effects all over the world. For internships, I can't answer.
Like, I think the clarification was like, we know the internships, like international students can apply, but if there were like a posting on Disney's careers.com, that was just a regular position, anyone could apply to that, right? Correct?
Oh,
it just, yeah. So I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, by the way, thank you so much for a couple people sharing some books in the chat there, so check that out. And Eugene is asking an off-topic question. What are kind of the basic requirements to get into the visual effect industry as a technical artist? Are there possible intern, part-time work learn opportunities?
Yeah. It's funny. I get asked this question a lot in terms of like, how do you get in as a visual effects artist? And nobody's path is always the same, which I think it really it varies. There's lots of interesting pathways into visual effects. I think we have artists who have architectural backgrounds, and they create these amazing environments. There's lots of different backgrounds and kind of pathways from an education standpoint. So I think a lot of it is kind of about your reel. as an artist, kind of the work you've done. We have, because we're ILM and we love Star Wars, we have Jedi Academies, and they're meant to help train up entry-level artists over a 6-week kind of curriculum, working with trainers, but also working with subject matter experts, whether they're animators or compositors over the course of those 6 weeks. And then, typically those folks stay on with us after and graduate into junior artist roles and get assigned to projects. So definitely possible. Lots of visual effects companies in BC do that too. BC has also a big animation scene, which is, again, very connected to visual effects, and hiring kind of different entry-level points. So those opportunities are definitely out there. Just no one standard path is kind of what I've experienced.
Yeah, check out the Disney careers. Again, the Disney Animation Studio. There's one in Vancouver now too. So lots of different entry points. I'm looking at the time here. Spencer, we have a lot of questions. Are you okay potentially maybe staying a little longer? We want to respect your time thus far.
Yeah, I think
we can get through most of the questions, but just wanted to check in with you because
no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm good for a bit after. Absolutely, if people.
Okay, we'll see. Hopefully, we can hammer most of these out. There's obviously lots of interest with what you shared, so this is really good. It's a very active chat, so I appreciate everyone's questions. So I'm going to keep going here. So I just lost myself in the chat here. There's this person is anonymously just saying thank you so much for this exciting session. They've always wanted to become a filmmaker, but they're on a CPA path now with a Sauder program, so kind of similar. They're looking to work in film production company. What role, full-time or part-time, will help towards this goal? And what department is preferable in Big Four, assurance, tax, consulting if I want to work later on in film production company?
That's a good question.
Yeah, you're the right person to ask this too.
No, it's true. I think if you can get experience with the film production credits, that doesn't actually, it's not always in tax. At PwC, actually, it wasn't. It was part of their assurance group who handled those. I think that's a good kind of experience in pathway in. It's funny, there aren't always a lot of finance roles in the industry, so you definitely have to, once you're ready, keep your eyes peeled for those. Having said that, and I don't know, this is also not a clear pathway for the on-set production accountants. There's definitely a gap there, or rather than saying a gap, there's more demand than there is supply of people who can do that job. So I think that's another thing I just call out too, in terms of where to look, and definitely something. Actually, the industry is looking for more training for production accounting, but I think that's what I would think of in terms of like the Big Four experiences. Like if you can get on a client file that has production tax credits, that would probably be a great start, because they are an important part of the kind of business climate for the film industry in Vancouver and BC.
And even like a little bit unrelated, it was nice to hear Kim share actually a UBC Sauder alumni who became, I think, a production assistant and is going through that pathway, right? So, then she said business students tend to do well in that kind of organized chaos. So that might be something you want to look at as well.
Yeah, that's good.
Question from Ziggy, and then we'll go to Claire, who has a hand up there waiting patiently. I'm not sure if this is relevant to your role, but I'd be curious to hear how you or ILM feel about the new kind of AI machine learning tools emerging in the creative industries. Do you see this as something you will use more in the future?
Absolutely. There's a big, I don't know if any of you are on ArtStation. There's definitely a bit of a movement in terms of the art side of AI that people are against. And I've seen some demos of like where you like put in some of these keywords to try to come up with an art department concept. Pretty amazing. I don't think it quite replaces what an actual artist can do, because it's just a compilation, and don't get me wrong, pretty amazing. I think the way I think about it, and I'm not a tech person, but I just think that it seems to me that it can help shorten kind of our timeframes in terms of what we're trying to achieve in any number of areas. again, I'm not a tech person, so I don't want to talk too much about it and make myself sound stupid. But even with, replacing faces, for example, it's talking about something close to home and how amazing some of that has turned out, particularly with Luke and Boba Fett. I think it's something that in visual effects we should be and are wanting to embrace, because it seems like a really powerful tool that we should figure out a bit.
Yeah, it's fascinating where you're going with, like, when you think about what people are creating with deep fakes and that sort of thing, and what that's going to mean with actors. What's the De Niro movie that you guys worked on again?
The Irishman.
Yeah, Irishman. They give you like so much of that tech, right, with the de-aging there. Claire, your question.
Yeah. Hello. I'm a Sauder student, specializing in accounting. And actually today, I just want to ask you some questions about networking and interviews. And you told us that what we have to do is just outside of our comfort zone, right? So for me, what I want to ask is, how did you enjoy the moment at the networking event, and how did you share good energy with others? So what's the main difference between your first try and second try? Could you share?
I think knowing I was more targeted on my second try. I think my first try I didn't really know what was going on. So I was definitely more focused. I had felt like I had put more energy into, say, figuring out PwC and tax specifically, and built up kind of some connections heading into that. So what I'd say worked best, especially with PwC, is when I went into that one, I already knew some of the people and I went to them, because that's easier. Like I said earlier, it's easier than going to somebody you don't know. I found when I went to other sessions, when I didn't, that felt more awkward. It's like, especially when you're kind of in these circles, I imagine they're in person again. You kind of have to shove your way in a little bit. It's just, it feels tough. And I think one thing I tried that I wouldn't recommend is going with a buddy. The reason I didn't find that worked is because it's like, you can't always, it's actually harder, I found, to do it with somebody else. So I think I wouldn't say at any point I enjoyed it, but I think I went for what felt the least uncomfortable in some cases, knowing that all of it's uncomfortable. So anything you can do in terms of like meeting some of the players beforehand, so it's less of an awkward kind of push your way in. That's how I try to approach it. It's not always possible. I acknowledge that. Maybe you could go into a recruiting session. I know absolutely nobody. So I feel like the easiest ones are, I look for little gaps in the circles of people around. And the other thing that I would recommend that I told people when I was actually on the PW side of recruiting is like, if you're interested in something, you want to hear more about something, ask them to introduce you to the next person. Like, who would you recommend I speak to next about X? For me, it was like film. Do you have any film clients? Is there anyone who I can talk to about that you recommend I speak to? Or something else that also that'll make people remember you. And if there are other things that are important to you, like, hey, do you have anyone from your diversity and inclusion team here I can speak to? Because I would also assume now that they're coming. Try to make them do the work for you. Get your first awkward in, and then get them to connect you to the rest is something else that I found worked quite well.
All right, we're going to do one last question, but I also want to just share that please, in the chat, we're going to put in a little takeaway form, but also stick around because we're going to ask Spencer his takeaway and as we wrap up. Spencer, you've been so generous with your time. So the last question here is from Amelia. Hi, I'm wondering, what are some job position skills that introverts feel comfortable working in?
That's a good question. I think a lot of them can be in kind of in accounting kind of fields, kind of more analytical side of things. I feel like most workplaces do have that kind of team environment, and just because you're an introvert doesn't mean you don't like people. I'll say that for sure, but I think kind of independent work helps. And I think, there are some jobs that are definitely always kind of a team sport kind of playing. and some jobs that have a mix. So I definitely look for something that has more of a mix, because I like sitting back and, I don't know, looking through spreadsheets still once in a while on my own time. So I would look for something that doesn't make it scream like you will be talking to people 24/7, because that's emotionally exhausting. Yeah, look for, I think when you're kind of reading through the job description, is there kind of independent work that is going to be done outside of talking?
Yeah. That's why hybrid for me is like a really nice mix of that too,
Yeah.
right? Like your physical environment. So before we finish for today, I'd like to give Spencer the last word. My takeaway is that image of you smiling, seeing CRA in Ottawa. Like, I could totally see you doing that. Very specific, right, for tax. What's the most important takeaway that you'd like the audience to leave with today?
Yeah, I think kind of what I tried to recap it all is like, it's when I think about my path is especially starting off in Big Four accounting, is like that kind of step ladder approach. I became really obsessed with it, and it was really, in a sense, that's comfortable, because you just know it's like after 2 years I'll be senior, another 2 years to 3 years I'll be a manager, and so on and so forth. And if that's what you want, that's great. Like, then follow that ladder. It's a great job path, don't get me wrong. But I think if you are interested in other things, I think you just got to be open to trying things, and not always having the end goal in mind. Your job and your career will change over the course, absolutely, for sure, right? You'll start with one plan, you'll go another way. And so being open to things that make you uncomfortable, including networking, I think will just open the opportunities, whether or not it's interacting with people, it's just trying different things. It's always served me well, and it's always kept me really engaged too, in what I'm doing. And I try to approach things like that still, in terms of where I'm at now, putting my hand up or asking questions when I don't understand what people are talking about, which happens all the time, I gotta say, in visual effects. That's even the software names go right over my head. So that's it. I think just being open to things that don't feel comfortable, networking included.
A lovely takeaway, and takes a lot of courage to kind of put ourselves out there. And I really appreciate that you're sharing it from a career educator standpoint, that careers aren't linear, but a lot of us want that kind of progression. So there's different ways to do it. I want to thank Spencer again. What an incredible speaker. Thank you for sharing your experience and insights today. Of course, a big thank you to all of you who have courage to be here and using the resources for today's office hour. Again, we'd love to hear your feedback for today's event. There's a short survey link in the chat. So please take a few minutes to respond to that. Again, that really helps shape our future alumni office hour events. I can't speak highly enough of the team that puts this together. Please check out the YouTube channel. Like everyone I've attended, there's so many rich things that you can learn. And again, so for more events and content hosted by the CSIC, please log into Careers Online. And we want to thank all of you again for your time, and have a lovely evening. We're again very gracious for alumni like Spencer to come back and connect and inspire all of us as well. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.